Good morning. Can everybody hear me this morning? It's kind of looking like I'm hoping this microphone will cooperate. It seems to be in a mood this morning like it is some mornings. I'd like to welcome everybody to our class this morning. Before we start, I do need to mention, if you're anything like me and don't always pay attention to the calendar, today is August 1st, so you can tell I'm not Casey. So we are starting a new class this morning, and as a reminder, we're doing things a little bit different this morning. Elders and deacons have been discussing a lot lately with our numbers back up a little bit, more attendance. We decided it good to split up our adult classes and offer two classes. So this morning, as we start this class, Marlon is starting a class over in the annex, talking about being more like Jesus. Depending on your perspective, good news, bad news, whether you're in here or over there, you're going to get both topics because we're going to teach 2 months and then swap. And so Marlon will come over here and teach his topic. So you can't avoid us if that's what you're trying to do. But I wanted to mention that just in case, it's more of a decision on what format you like. I know some people like coming in the auditorium, having class in here. And for some people it's the most feasible, but I know there's other people that learn better and like a smaller setting like the annex offers. So if that's you and you just forgot that today was August 1st and you want to skip over to Marlon's class, not to miss his and be over there for that smaller atmosphere, feel free to jump up and move over. You're not going to hurt my feelings if I see you get up and walk out. I'm just going to assume you want to be in the annex, and it's not because you don't want to hear me. So just want to throw that out there before we started, because I know there might be some that August 1st may have slipped up on you, kind of like it has me and probably Marlon too. I know he and I have been texting back and forth the last couple of weeks, keeping reminding each other that August 1st is on a Sunday and not a Monday or Tuesday. So both of us probably would have rather it been on a Monday to give us about 3 or 4 more days to get prepared. But anyway, we're going to see how it goes. I do want to thank everybody that's been praying for Kaylee. She is doing a lot better. As of yesterday, she's, felt perfectly fine. So it's just getting a challenge to keep her quarantined as the doctors recommended. So she's got 2 or 3 more days of quarantine, and then she'll be back out. And of course, we're following doctor's orders with that. And then because Aiden hadn't been vaccinated yet, he's at home with her this morning. But we do appreciate your prayers, and for the most part it seems like she had a couple of rough days, and then other than that she's hasn't felt too bad compared to, I know a lot of folks it's hit pretty hard. So I will say it's been a while since I've taught, and I guess with our year of quarantine with COVID, to me it makes it feel like it's been even longer since I've taught a class. To be honest, I can't even remember when the last time I taught an adult class was. I'd have to go back and look at notes, but I guess because of that, anybody been watching the Olympics? And I feel a little bit like somebody who who's trying to get back into exercising and trying to get back in the swing of things when it comes to teaching. And with this topic that I've decided to bite off, which I bring upon myself sometimes, I feel like I'm trying to join the Olympics or something, because the more I've studied this and the more I've prepared for this is, for whatever reason, seems to be somewhat of an overwhelming topic. But we are going to talk about leadership. And it's going to be a little bit different maybe than if you've been in my classes, the format. Some of our classes are going to be a little bit of more of an overview, maybe not necessarily a deep dive, but just more of not overview, but survey might be a better word, just to hopefully get you kind of thinking about leadership and some of the things involved with that. And then there'll be other classes where we will deep dive into some things, and some of that's going to kind of depend on y'all. And I hope you'll participate and feel free to comment and give me your thoughts, because that'll just help the class go even better. But to start, let's go to Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. This is going to kind of be our, I don't know if class motto is the right word, but we're probably going to come back to this verse a good bit, and may not be one you would necessarily tie to the topic of leadership, but it is going to be something we're going to kind of keep, maybe start each class with reading it each week. We'll see. It's a verse we're all familiar with, but there it says, "Then Jesus told his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.'" I'm not going to say much about that verse, but we're going to, like I said, we're going to keep coming back to it. And I hope by the end of this 2-month period, I won't even have to tell you, what that verse has to do with leadership. I hope it's becomes kind of evident. So what first thing that comes to mind when you think of the word leadership or leader? What are some things that come to mind? Again, this first class is going to be kind of an introductory class, so we're going to kind of hit several different topics, and then we'll come back in later weeks and kind of get a little more detailed into it. But I kind of want to get our thoughts kind of together on where we're kind of going. But so what's the first thought that comes to mind when you think of leadership? Someone in charge. That's a good one. I didn't have that in my notes. Anybody else? Knowledgeable. We're going to see that's real important, especially when we steer into what we're going to be studying, spiritual leadership. Any other? Accountability. That's a big one. Kind of scares some of us away from stepping into that leadership role sometimes, doesn't it? What other thoughts do you have? Wisdom. Any others? What is it, putting it a little bit different way, what's it mean to lead? Yeah, that's an important one. And I tell you, my outline for this class has changed about 4 times in the last 2 weeks. I keep changing where I think I want to go with this. But as of right now, the last thing we're going to talk about is that, which is something I think sometimes we miss when we talk about leadership. It takes people to follow us. Right. You got to have somebody to follow you. You got to have and to that point, a platoon or a group. And so that's going to be applicable to what we talk about as well. Likable. Right. And we're going to touch on that on a little bit. And actually, I think I haven't talked to Marlon a whole lot about what he's teaching over there, but I'm thinking they're going to somewhat mesh together because he's going to delve a little bit into personalities. I think we probably won't touch more on that, but it does take not necessarily have to agree with everything the leader has to say, because sometimes part of being a leader, they have to make some tough decisions and do some things that's maybe not popular, but you do have to have respect and be likable.
I think in order to be a leader, you have to have confidence in yourself and the knowledge you're trying to share.
Right. Confidence in yourself and knowledge in what you're trying to share. That's a good point. We're probably going to talk about that some back here and then up here. Scotty? Trustworthy. Yep. We're going to talk about that as well. Mr. Frone?
I heard a comparison one time about sheep herders.
Yep.
In the Middle East, sheep herders walk among sheep.
Yeah.
Sheep learn their voice. Even if they get to the other crowd of sheep, that sheep herder walks off, his sheep follow.
Yeah.
Out west in the United States of America, the sheep herders ride behind the sheep on a big truck that blows home.
Right. More of a...
That's the difference in style.
Yeah, that is a good point. And we're going to talk a lot about, obviously, when we get into talking about elders, shepherds, and what that means. And you bring up a good point. When it was first presented that way, people understood what a shepherd was, that they led. And one of the books I read talks about a shepherd smelling like the sheep, means he's among the sheep, but he's also leading the sheep. So we'll talk about that. But in now's day and time with, like Brother Frone said, if you didn't hear out in the Midwest and hear those that are shepherds, a lot of times ride around and pick up behind them and just kind of force them where they want to go. And that's something we'll talk about when it comes to when we're talking specifically about elders and leadership is how that relationship works. being able to know the needs of the group, which again goes back to being among the sheep, and being able to put those needs above maybe your own opinions and your own thoughts and that sort of thing. So those are all good. Y'all are, this class may be easier than I thought. Mr. Jim?
Just a lot of things about qualities of leadership. If you look at a real definition, I'm talking about generic, not in reference necessarily to the church.
Right.
Is the ability of an individual or group to guide and to influence followers in a certain direction.
Right, that's a real good point. The ability to guide and influence. And you bring up an interesting point, and we're going, and again, that's part of what's made this a little bit confusing or a challenge on me preparing this, is there's a lot of books you can read and a lot of study, even people that don't even go to church that want to be good leaders when it comes to the secular world. So you can find and a lot of good books. In some of my previous jobs, I've been through some training where it was real good training. You sit through the training, and this guy up here, and you can tell by the way he's talking, he's not a very spiritual guy, but some of the stuff he's throwing out there, he's throwing it out there like it's this novel idea that they've come up with on how to be a better leader, and you're sitting there thinking, well, that's coming straight out of the Bible. So there's a lot of secular books you can read that'll help in general sense of being a leader, and I'd encourage you to read some of those if that's you're inclined to. But there's also a lot of try real hard in this class to keep coming back to the Bible as our main guide. So there's going to be some times, like today, we might not read a ton of scriptures. And then next week, if it goes the way I think, we're going to deviate a little bit and it's going to be a little different. But I think it's going to be something next week that I think will help us in further classes just to present some of that material to you. But
If you're going to be a good leader, you have to know your topic. You need to be excited about it.
right.
If you're not excited about your topic, you don't know if you're not a good leader.
Yeah, that's a good point. Really, with anything, if you're leading, you've got to be the one being excited about it and enthusiastic about it in order to influence those, again, followers. All right, so just a little different since we're in Bible class and we're really talking about leadership, but more specifically, it's going to be about spiritual leadership. One of the first things that we think about when we think about spiritual leadership is elder. What different thoughts come in mind when you think of the word elder? Is there any difference? Anything special about elder as far as leadership as opposed to maybe some of the general statements we've made?
God's word set forth very specific qualifications for someone in that position.
Right. Very good point. When it comes to being an elder, there are specific qualifications before you can even step into that role, right? And we're going to spend at least one Sunday class looking at those a little closer. And again, that's something a lot of times we've probably all heard sermons on those qualifications, and that tends to be what we go to when we talk about elders. And again, it's really important, and we're going to look at that real close in here, but we're also going to look at other things when it comes to being elders that'll help us understand their role, even if we're not in those roles. Any other thing? That's the main one that comes to my mind when we're specifically talking about elders, that there is that qualification that goes with that. Even if they're a good leader out in the secular world in their job, may not necessarily qualify them or mean that they possess what it takes to be an elder. Ms. D?
An elder has to be a man of the Bible. He has got to know if Michael or whoever's up there preaching, if they are not leading us down the right path, using the wrong scriptures, taking them out of context, this man has got to be a godly man, always the man.
Right. That's a good point.
Something people don't think about. 99% of those qualifications by elders, they apply to every member of the church.
And that's going to come up here in just a minute, probably. What Ms. D's saying is that elder, has to be a godly man, has to know the Bible so that they can, without going into too much detail on it, so they can perform their duties as an elder. And then as Mr. Melvin said, most of those qualifications of elders are things as Christians we should have as well. So sometimes we think of them as odd, you know, this big, huge extra thing, but really they're not always that.
You're gonna be held to higher degree of accountability than the final judge.
Right,
So that's a heavy, heavy responsibility.
right. It is a huge responsibility. They are going to be held accountable for things that the rest of the congregation necessarily won't. So it does, those are all things that a congregation, when they're appointing or recommending elders, have to keep in mind, and then especially that person that's going to desire that responsibility needs to be mindful of. So again, that all things we're going to get into as we move on. What about deacon? Is there anything else? Is there any difference? Do we consider deacons as leaders in our church? Right. It's a little bit different. And we're going to get into that, but still leaders. What about are elders and deacons the only leaders in the church?
The teachers are also held to a higher standard.
Teachers, yep, they're responsible for what they're presenting to make sure it's right. They're leading that class. That's something I want us to keep in mind as we go through this, is that it's not just about elders and deacons. There are other people in certain, and maybe not all of the time, but you know, when you're teaching a class, you're leading in that class. When you're heading up, getting things together for a potluck meal or fellowship meal, in that instance, you're being a leader. If you're doing things with the youth, chaperoning, you're being a leader. So there's things we're going to talk about, you know, throughout here that some of them may specifically be addressing elders, but again, as to Mr. Melvin's point, they're qualities that we can desire to have and will help us be better leaders in whatever aspect we're leading in.
Every Christian is a leader. If you're not leading as a Christian, you're wrong.
Yeah, that's
So you've got to be leading someone somewhere. And the biggest leadership we have is all little children follow us and our
right.
That scares me sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of us, you know, if we have families, and parents, we're leading in our families. And to Mr. Melvin's point, the Great Commission wasn't given to just elders and deacons or just the apostles, was it? It was given to all of us. So there's things when it comes to being leaders that some qualities and things we can work to improve on that'll help us with that. So why? Well, this was working a minute ago. I guess I told you a story, Thomas. You might have to advance to that next one. I don't have very many this morning, and we don't necessarily have to have them. Why is it important for us to study about leadership?
One thing we need is, if we teach leadership, it puts a desire in other people, younger people, to be a leader down the road.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We have to prepare early for our future leaders, and if we don't start studying about it, you know, more often, and I'd say, kind of confession on my own part, I've been a deacon for, I've lost count now, probably at least 10 years, maybe more. And honestly, this is the first time I've really delved into a deep study, you know, on my own. I've been to classes, I've read books here and there on it, but I've never actually just really dug in and studied, and that's a shortcoming on my own part. But I think we a lot of times don't, even in the church as a whole, you know, preachers will preach sermons on it when it's getting close to time for us to think about appointing new leaders, and then he may teach lessons on leadership throughout the year at times, but you know, a lot of times we don't really just go on our own personal study, because why? A lot of times, subconsciously maybe we think, well, I'm not a leader, you know, that's for the elders and deacons to be studying on, but it's important for all of us to study about that for the reasons we've already talked about. But how did who set up elders and deacons? God. So that's how he wants the church to be organized. And so for that very reason alone, it's important for us to study so that, we know we're doing things as he would want. How much does leadership affect how effective can a church be without the proper leadership? Usually dries up and goes away. It's real difficult. Not to say there haven't been churches that are able to make it through those situations, and sometimes it's out of maybe no fault of any certain congregation that they don't have leadership. Just sometimes it's population, that sort of thing. But it is very hard for a church to be effective when they don't have proper leadership structure. There was one of the books I read made a statement that healthy churches will grow and unhealthy churches won't, which is not a real profound statement. I mean, that's if you look physically with kids, if kids are healthy, they'll grow. But where does the health of any church really start? Starts with your leadership and preparing and training. So, and all of that starts again, and it'll be more clear when we get further into this. The decisions of what classes we teach and how we do that. It all starts with our elders and sometimes with suggestions from deacons. But ultimately, again, we go back to responsibility. That falls on our church leaders to make those decisions when it comes to how we're going to structure our classes and such. So, but ultimately the health of our leadership will most of the time dictate the health of the church overall, because again it all goes back to our leadership. So again, that is important reasons why we should be studying about leadership. It's working now. So let's go back again. We're going to kind of go back to one of Mr. Jim's comments. This is not a verse in the Bible, but it's one of the definitions I found. And again, you go back to all the secular books and then even spiritually based books that talk about leadership. They all have their own definition of leadership, but this is one I found that was kind of short and concise, but also makes some really good points. So we're going to look at that just to kind of get our thought process going. And this is from Dr. Keith Davis, who wrote a book called Human Behavior at Work. And how he defines leadership is this: the process of encouraging and helping others to work enthusiastic toward objectives. A lot in just a few words there, but to get our thought process on what leadership is, what's the first thing he says leadership is? It's a process. It's not just a title that we give somebody, and this is something that's true with whether you're talking about church leadership or in a company. It's not a sign on the door and just a person making necessary decisions. It's leadership is a process, which influences a lot of the things we talked about. And when we talk about spiritual leadership, it's not just a one-time thing. It's a commitment and something we have to work at. It's a process of what gives us one of the duties we're going to talk about later on. Again, some of y'all already mentioned this a process of encouraging. Again, when you think about shepherd, the term shepherding, it falls in with this a lot. One of the books I read kind of likened it less like a boss or a manager and more like a cheerleader. A leader is someone that has the ability to influence someone to do things that maybe they might not normally do, or help them do things even better. So a leader is an encourager. the word toward there, to work toward, and he says enthusiastically. Somebody even said you had to be enthusiastic about what's going on, so you're helping even the folks you're leading to be enthusiastic about it. But what does the word toward imply? Going forward, direction, I think somebody said. So a leader, and especially an elder, when we're talking about church setting, is someone who has direction, and can help lead a congregation in that direction. And what is the direction toward? Toward heaven for us, that'd be the ultimate. I would hope we never have a group of elders that's main goal is not to get everyone to heaven. And then that probably would be goal number one. And then there's, of course, other goals below that, some large, some small. But, that it implies that leadership has to consciously have those goals in mind that they're constantly working toward and guiding us toward. And again, we'll talk more about that, but that does put that ultimate, responsibility on the leaders to lead toward a certain goal or objective. And of course, we should all, as Christians, and if we're here today, our ultimate goal is to get to heaven. But when you start talking about, I guess, smaller goals and things, missions and things the congregation wants to do, that ultimately falls on the elders, as we'll discuss. But those goals can be come up with, in different ways. I'm not in saying that the elders alone have to sit down and figure out what we're all doing. They, can have help from others with that.
This triggered a memory from way back when I worked for Holiday Inns and went through a leadership program. And I'm trying to remember exactly how it was stated, but it says effectively getting goals established and implemented through others to reach the desired end result.
Right. Yeah, and if you didn't hear all that, is it just the leader's responsibility? And when I say leaders, elders, deacons, teachers, whoever you may say as a leader, is it just fall on those people to do the work of God? No, it's all of us together, right? We all have a part to play. Even if we think our part might be small, we still have a part to play. So again, the leadership is what guides us toward that. I think, Mario, do you have something?
I do believe whether it's spiritual or unspiritual, to be a leader and leadership, you have to have three things: is to be humble, strong, and self-control.
Right. Very good points. I don't think we've mentioned those yet, but all those will come up. Being humble, strong, and not self-absorbed. We're going to discuss those more later.
When you become a leader, you should always strive to be a better leader than you were when you became
All right.
To become a good leader, you surround yourself with people to help you be a better leader.
Right. Very good point. Always room for improvement, right? We never reach that goal. Just like with studying the Bible, we can read the same verse now and read it a month later, and we find a different meaning in there. That's the power of the Word. But as leaders, as Christians, as followers, we can always improve, which again brings us back to it's good for us to study this probably more often than we do, so that we can improve on that. So we've talked about elders, and it's obvious we can't talk about leadership without elders, so there's going to be times where we slip over and dig into that a little bit. So we're just going to look at a couple of verses about elder responsibilities, and don't get disappointed. We're going to look more at this later, but just again, as part of our introduction to this class, we're going to kind of whet our appetite a little bit. So these are the verses we're going to look at to start with. So let's go ahead and read Acts 20, verse 28. and some of y'all may have a different translation that may word this slightly different. I believe I'm reading from the ESV is what I picked up this morning. There it says, pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. Other translations may say, keep watch over yourselves and all the flock, and uses the word overseer, which ESV uses overseers as shepherd. The word shepherd comes in. So keep watch over yourself and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he bought with his own blood. A very powerful verse there. All right, 1 Peter 5, 1 through 4. Let's read that, and then we'll discuss a few things about that. So I exalt the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. So what are some things you see there when it talks about, there's some qualifications in there too, and we're going to talk about those in a week or two, but what are some things there when it talks about responsibilities of elders? Mr. Melvin already said one of them. They're shepherds, to shepherd the flock, and we'll look more into what that means in coming classes, because that says a lot there.
Basically not to do it because you're covetous.
Right. It's not something you're just after prestige or a title, or, it's, again, goes back to your attitude. And not to do it for money, yeah.
Understanding the world situations, you work for money.
Right,
The Lord's church. And I don't think it'd be wrong to pay an elder, that's all he did was kind of go for money to the church. It wouldn't be wrong to do that, I'm not saying that. But if you do it just so you can get money,
right,
that's a different situation.
yeah,
Because people don't understand how much money an elder got a lot of times going and visiting and doing good.
right.
It's personal life.
Yeah, I see. I guess I've never looked at it that way. I know we don't, maybe they had issues, back then maybe with gaining money by being an elder. That's something I haven't really looked into, but that's not something we really worry ourselves with here, because, in our day and time, but the flip side of that, like you said, the sacrifice that goes on with being an elder of they're giving up some stuff, In some cases, they might be able to go work a second job, make more money for their family, but that time that they would spend working that second job, is taken up by doing the things they have to do as elders. Were you going to say something, Mr. Jim?
One of the things a lot of times you have in the time that it was here, a lot of the elders, bishops, pastors, they were the leaders and did a lot of preaching. So they were access to a lot of, I said a lot, but funds, like we talked about. They did sort of get things, but money like we talked about.
Right.
Available to them, which could have been a temptation a little bit more.
That's true.
I don't know, that there are, you all may not know it, not very often, but there are paid elders in the Church of Christ.
Yeah. Yep. That's,
So one of the sacrifices they do make is they take time from their families to go to be with the family of God.
right. Yep.
It's a big sacrifice.
It is, and it's a big balance and a responsibility, and something that I think anybody aspiring to be an elder has to weigh, is that it is going to take time away from their families. not to discourage anyone from doing that, but it's just, again, if we were going to go take a job out in the secular world, I would hope, a lot of times we go into interviews and everybody's asking us questions, but I would advise anybody, you need to have just as many questions yourself, because you need to know what you're signing up for if you go agree to take a job. So the same thing with being an elder. We have to be aware of what we're responsible for and what we're agreeing to before we go into that. President, just as something to, an interesting thought that seemed to apply to the thought of being a shepherd. President Roosevelt had this to say about just leadership in general, that the leader works in the open and the boss in covert. The leader leads, the boss drives. That goes back to what Mr. Frone said earlier about shepherds leading and bosses driving. So again, being a shepherd is not about being the boss from how we see a boss, but more about being a leader.
There's another thing that we probably don't like to talk about. The elder has a responsibility of making me a better Christian. Because an elder is someone that's easy to hand your responsibility to.
Right. Yeah.
And they've got to have the ability to push back. It's like, hey, I think that's a good idea, so why don't you go?
Right. That's a good point.
I asked him, I said, why don't you go see so-and-so? Because they're kind of wavering about it. He said, well, why don't you go see them? So it's a good place to hand it. It's not the right place on the planet for us to hand our responsibilities to them.
Yeah.
So they have a responsibility. They have to have the ability to push back, and that's not easy to do.
Right.
It's really not easy to do.
It's not.
What they do is they go ahead and they take it and they go do it when we.
Right. And what does that lead to sometimes when the elders do that? A weak congregation, because they're not encouraging those members to grow and take some responsibility on themselves. It can also lead to burnout. Elders taking on, everything on themselves and not helping the members grow and do some of the things themselves. Because again, like we said before, we all have a responsibility to God to do good works, and that responsibility is not appoint good elders and enough of them, and then they take care of everything. It's again, we have things we have to see. And again, that kind of leads us to the word keep watch and overseer. What comes to mind when you think about the idea of keeping watch?
Well, a shepherd always is on guard to make sure that the wolf and the bear didn't destroy his flock, or to make sure that they live in still waters and creek.
Right.
That was his responsibility. He kept watch kind of in to see what was going on.
Yeah.
That's what elders are doing.
Yeah.
A lot of times as elders, you miss stuff.
Yeah.
You see someone that's not attending like they should, and you don't go check it out. You have messed up because you caught it earlier, you might just say that soul, brought it back to the law.
Right. So big, again, as we've all said, big responsibility, and it's keeping watch. I think, it's, as Melvin said, looking on the outside for dangers coming in, but also looking inward too, as Brother Frone said. It's a lot, it's a lot to keep up with, and it's a keeping watch, and it says not only over the congregation, but it's also tells too. Again, self-awareness, evaluating their own selves as well as the congregation, and to me, it's kind of to me a feel kind of implies protection. It's the leader's responsibility to protect those under their charge.
It's active and proactive versus passive or reactive.
Right. True. Yep. It's not just sitting back and waiting on something to happen and then addressing it. It's looking out ahead. And again, some, I guess, delegation and things are involved there. again, one that we'll talk more about, and y'all have already mentioned, teaching the word, and that has a lot of different, areas. Ensuring the word's being taught correctly by our programs, by our teachers, but also, I think we'll see elders have responsibility too to do teaching themselves. And sometimes we focus that on just standing up here like this teaching, but I think there's tons of ways elders can teach, not just in a classroom setting. So decision making, where does decision making come in when it comes to being an elder? Based on Scripture, yeah.
It all started with the elders.
Yeah, it does, I guess, start or end, depending on how you look at it with the elders. We all agree elders have the ultimate responsibility for at least main decisions, or again, when I think of decisions in this context, it's more about the direction we're headed, right? Our goals and our objectives. But it could also come down to some small things too, that,
The elders can delegate authority to someone else to go and take care of something.
right. There is delegation involved, and probably as some of the things we've said, and necessary. Again, we're going to talk more about this.
Look at the first deacons. They were all spiritual men, and they were able to go and teach and do things.
Yeah,
They just wasn't overseeing, but they were told to go, and they were full of faith.
right.
So, if we're full of faith, we're gonna want to go out there and teaching and doing these things.
Right.
And it makes the elders' job a lot easier to make decisions. But,
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have to look at that, where it talks there about, again, being overseers. First Peter talks about not lording over those in their charge. I believe the verse the translation I read, even said not overbearing instead of lording over. But if you look, one verse there, and we're running out of time, and we'll maybe pick up here next week, but Matthew 20, verse 25 through 28, the last one there, it's talking, he's not necessarily talking about just the elders there, but it says, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercising authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be a great among you must be your servant. A lot of times we don't think about a leader being a servant, but I think we're going to find being an elder is more about being a servant than it is, again, looking at it from a secular standpoint of being a manager or a boss. It's being a shepherd is leading and being a servant at the same time, which sounds contradictory, but when we're talking about spiritual leadership, they really go hand in hand. And I think we have to keep in mind too, just as Mr. Jim mentioned earlier when we were talking about money, that thinking about things back in that time, being an elder, because they were coming out of this time where you had the Pharisees and Sadducees and those in the Jewish, I guess, culture, the spiritual leaders were also their secular leaders because it all tied together for them. So there's a lot of prestige in being, and again, as we've seen, Jesus, rubbed against those people so much because they had taken it too far and were lording over. This is talking about the Gentiles, but even the Pharisees and those who should have been spiritual leaders that really weren't leading, they were lording over the common Jews, I guess. So even more so for us, probably these early church, some of this stuff was maybe a new way of thinking when it come to being a spiritual leader. They were used to what they were seeing, and that was these Pharisees and Sadducees. So I'm sure it was, even for well-intentioned new Christians, it was a change in the way of thinking and the way of viewing leadership. I mean, just like the way Jesus taught his disciples, washing their feet and stuff. teaching them it was about being, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. That comes into play when we talk about spiritual leaders. And as Brother Foam mentioned, it's a fine balance there, and elders doing their duties and their responsibilities, but sometimes they have to give up and we'll talk more about this in a week or so. There's a way to get things done fast, and there's a way to do things to where it may not happen as fast, but it allows to involve the congregation and help teach those in the congregation to do some things. So it's a balance there with spiritual leadership in making decisions and at the same time keeping everyone involved in those decisions, if what I'm saying makes sense. And again, we'll look at that more. We'll pick up there kind of next week. Again, I appreciate all your comments. We didn't get through everything I wanted to, and that's perfectly fine. I'm glad y'all are talking, because it helps me know kind of where y'all's thoughts are and where to direct our discussion. But we'll pick up next week on just some things from a couple of these books. Again, like I said, some of this will be kind of like a survey. I've read a bunch of books on this, and everybody has their own little different take, but I found a couple things that I'll present to you just to help kind of get you thinking on some things about church leadership and some skills of leaders from a different perspective that will just add to what we've already talked about. And then most of next week, we'll probably be talking about different leadership styles, how with everybody's a different personality, so everybody kind of has different leadership styles, but yet we can still adjust our style. As we've said, always room for improvement. So there's ways to improve those styles that'll help us. And I want to take time next week to do that, because as we move on into looking deeper at elders and deacons and teachers and different roles of leaders, going back and being aware of that, what leadership style we have will help us apply, I think, the things we see in Scripture when it comes to being leaders. So again, thank y'all for your comments, and look forward to being with you next week. Thank you.